Hello everyone. With the announcement of Remnant 2, I wanted to make a video discussing some concepts about Remnant's lore that I don't believe have been touched on anywhere else. I've had these thoughts floating around in my head for around a year now, but it seems like a good idea to finally articulate them now that I know that more Remnant awaits on the horizon. It'd be interesting to see how accurate my thoughts are if more info is revealed, and maybe see what discussion can still be had with the info we have now. Please feel free to ignore the background footage, it's just random shit that bears no relevance to what I'm talking about. There will be no reference images provided because I am a lazy bastard, so feel free to do something else and just listen in if you want. The idea I want to discuss today is simple. I believe the world of Remnant takes place in a computer program, or more specifically, a simulation of some sort. I don't believe that my theory is entirely conclusive, or that it's able to explain everything, or that every aspect of the game fits into this theory in some way, but I do believe it's on the right track. Even though little of the evidence is compelling on its own, the fact that there's so much of it pointing to the same thing makes it awfully hard to write off as coincidence. The idea began with a simple problem. One of the more bizarre choices in this game's design is the strange digital environments conjured by both the final boss and Clementine. In the case of the final boss, you could maybe write this off as some reality-bending magic fuckery granted to him by the power of the root, but Clementine is able to do the same thing he is. There's only one connection between these two characters that I think bears relevance here. Both are what are known as dreamers. Now, the final boss is named Dreamer, but he's not the only dreamer in the world of Remnant. It'd be easier to look at that as a title. Back before Earth became overrun by the root, scientists had spent years working on a dreamer program. Numerous dreamers were created and exploited to try to connect to other worlds. Their minds could be used to break through the walls of reality and forge links with other worlds. Eventually, however, the root managed to step into Earth through at least one of these dreamers, thus beginning the invasion of Earth, resulting in the world we see in Remnant. The Dreamer boss was not part of the original Dreamer program, but he was created later to maintain the root's point of entry into Earth, so he has the same functions and powers as all the other dreamers of the past. As for Clementine, during her time in the Dreamer program, she formed a connection to the Guardian of Riasum and mysteriously vanished from Earth sometime afterwards. The early experiments on the Dreamers were hindered by the Dreamers themselves. Their minds would defend themselves from peering into other worlds, causing scientists to begin sedating them to circumvent this. It was only after subduing the consciousness of the Dreamers that success was had connecting to other worlds. By reading the logs in Ward Prime, it can be noted that Dreamer activity, especially those that make contact with the root, seems to take a mental toll. A dreamer named Gastian, after a period of restlessness, suddenly mobilized and began to cause chaos. After immense death and destruction, Gastian killed himself. Scientists working with a dreamer named Katerin began to suffer from severe depression and nihilism. One man, Dr. Schleiermacher, was so affected that he was quarantined and considered to be a danger to both himself and others. Another man, Dr. Brunner, shared feelings as severe as Schleiermacher and ended up taking his own life. Stepping away from the Dreamer program for a moment, almost every world in the Remnant universe has a Guardian, which exists to protect it against the root. As long as the Guardian lives, or is otherwise functional, the root cannot invade. The exception to this seems to be Earth, which, according to the Keeper, needs no Guardian as long as the root are not invited in somehow. Rom's Guardian was incapacitated by the Undying King, in an attempt to fight the root and demonstrate the might of his armies. Rom fell, and the Undying King laid waste to the world to get rid of the root. The Iskall Queen contracts the player to kill the Guardian of Corsus in order to let the root invade so she can assimilate them. Yaisha's Guardian is killed by the protagonist of Chronos, and is now on the brink of invasion, seeing as the root horror is present and the Ravager knows it's there. So those are some facts about the world of Remnant, but how does this fit into the idea of it all being a computer program or simulation? I believe the root can be equated to some sort of grand virus or malware. The dreamers are some sort of network connection, and their mind their firewall. The guardians then being something akin to an antivirus. Many computer viruses or otherwise malicious stuff will work by injecting or inserting themselves into otherwise legitimate programs. These programs have the ability to do things within the system, and the virus uses those programs in order to attack the rest of the system until it can take more direct action. The goal is often nothing more than devastation. Recall that the root itself can do nothing as long as a guardian lives, or without an invitation in the case of Earth. However, the root and its presence, whether physical or metaphysical, seems to be able to induce a feeling of resentment towards one's own kind, either feeling that they need to be wiped out, or compelling them to act on that feeling. This is not unlike computer virus behavior. Infect a program, or a person, and use it to enact harm when you can't do it yourself. The end goal? Mayhem. Behold Dreamer Gastian. After making contact with what can be readily assumed as the root, he becomes destructive, killing himself and those around him. An autopsy revealed growths on his brain. They are described like the root nexus on Earth, indicating that the root is likely responsible for this incident. Behold Dr. Schleiermacher and Dr. Brunner. Both were scientists working with Dreamer Katerin, and both began to feel intense disdain for the human race, feeling that perhaps their own extinction would be the best, most peaceful future. Dr. Brunner eventually commits suicide after finding himself alone with Katerin. Dr. Schleiermacher carries on, but is eventually institutionalized, and becomes a danger to himself and those around him. The rest of the scientists fall into a similar despair, though not to the same extent as these two men. Behold those responsible for the root invasions. Harsgard, after discovering a root being named Clawbone, became increasingly obsessed with contacting the root and letting them into Earth. It was him who founded the Dreamer program and forced it to continue despite numerous tragedies. The Undying King and Iskall Queen alike have attempted to weaken or kill their world's guardian in order to meet and wage war with the root. The protagonist of Chronos was tricked into destroying the guardians of 3 different worlds. The root had no access to these worlds before this, and somehow, seemingly through some contact, someone has acted in order to let the root in. Compare this to Riasum, whose guardian falls to the root alone. It's not that the only possibility of root invasion is internal sabotage. And lastly, behold the survivors of Earth. The root cultist worships the root, and believes in the annihilation of humanity. Just like Schleiermacher and Brunner, he thinks humanity a lost cause, needing saving from itself. Look at Brabus and the Mud Dogs. They're all infected and coughing, and they're vicious, violent people. Sure, you could attribute that to simply being the state of the world after an apocalypse, but look at Mudtooth, or the citizens of Ward 13. They are kind, considerate people, and they do not suffer from the same infection. The dying Hunter and Liz and Liz still remain passive while infected, but the Hunter is nearly dead as a result of it, and we don't know the health of Liz and Liz. The Mud Dogs, however, are all infected, which indicates that it's a persistent, widespread issue among their ranks, and it's not killing them off. It could be, then, that the infection inspires violence within the victim, and those that give in to its influence tend to live longer. And there's also the Mad Merchant. He is undoubtedly touched by the root, and he is very quick to violence as a result. The other related terms are a bit more self-explanatory. The Dreamers were used to connect to other worlds. Assuming that every world is an individual system or program, they act similarly to a network connection, enabling transfers between the systems. Their consciousness, however, acted to prevent these connections. According to scientists working with the Dreamers, this was the conscious mind defending itself when trying to peer into other worlds, which were perceived as falsities. This is not unlike how firewalls work, which control network traffic, block undesirable connections, and establish barriers between trusted and untrusted networks. Just like the brains of the Dreamers, they defend the network from the unknown and the untrustworthy. And then you have the Guardians. As long as it lives, the root can't get in to cause any havoc on its own. Except Earth doesn't have a Guardian for reasons I can't explain. But you get the idea. The Guardian keeps the root at bay. The antivirus keeps the malware at bay. If you disable your antivirus, you run the risk of a malware infection. And if you disable your Guardian, you run the risk of a root incursion. With all of the major theorization out of the way, there's also a few other details that I find worth mentioning. For starters, we can look at the presentation of certain game mechanics. First, respawning at the crystal is acknowledged as an in-universe occurrence. In Ford's writings, he recounts his own death, and is bewildered at how he yet lives. It could be that our mutual contact with the crystal has allowed us to ascend the simulation or program and control it somehow, or at least carry our consciousness between runs of it. Second, Remnant also features randomized content that can be re-randomized at will through the process of re-rolling. It's all done at Ward 13. Campaign, adventure, and survival. It's not like New Game Plus and other campaign-based games, or a new run in a roguelike. This is a control given to the player, and it is done at the crystal, which again implies that the crystal has given us power to ascend the simulation. Randomization like in Remnant is not a common feature among games like it, and for it to be featured in a game that seems to hint so heavily towards simulation doesn't strike me as a coincidence. Additionally, some item descriptions and names seem to point to ideas of a simulation. For example, the definition of simulacrum means a copy, representation, or imitation of something, and its description in game seems to indicate that the simulacrum is the material of everything, the worlds, and the beings that live in it. So, if the simulacrum is indeed the mass from which all things were made, and a simulacrum, by definition, is some sort of copy or imitation, then all things are that same imitation. Perhaps you might call it a simulation of some sort. There's also the description of the liquid escape and the glowing fragment. The description for the liquid escape is presented as the ramblings of a lunatic, talking about how nothing is real and that it's all just a simulation. Which obviously sounds crazy, but given everything else discussed so far, perhaps it's not. It is a ticket right back to the Worldstone, and we've already discussed that respawning could be more than just a game mechanic. As for the glowing fragment, it's described as an infinite sea of realities, each different from one another. Seeing as the glowing fragment is used to create alternative appearances for your armors, this too would tie into the idea of simulating realities. The last thing I want to bring up is the Keeper in the Labyrinth. The words he chooses to use when describing the state of the worlds are peculiar, at least to me. For example, one of his lines describes the labyrinth as holding infinite possibilities, which would be consistent with the idea that reality is being run in some sort of simulation. Not that it must mean that, but it simply sounds especially deliberate to me. He also speaks about the root corrupting everything. Again, not that it directly definitively points to the ideas of the game taking place in a computer, but corruption is certainly a term used frequently in that field. Much of the Keeper's dialogue also seems to resemble that of the Atlas in No Man's Sky. Just FYI, I haven't played No Man's Sky in a while, so my facts might be slightly off, and obviously spoilers ahead. In No Man's Sky, the Atlas is desperately running simulations of the universe in order to figure out how to stop its own shutdown. It is responsible for the creation of the player and the galaxies you explore. The Atlas is keenly aware of its own deterioration and speaks of corruptions, cracks, and failings, much like the Keeper does. The two beings speak to the player on similar terms, so it could very well be that they play the same kind of role. So then, if it can be accepted that Remnant's universe is a simulation or some other computer program, then we finally have a workable explanation of the problem of the digital arenas. One of the scientists working with the Dreamers clarifies that the other worlds are not just other planets in space. From what I can gather, they seem to be closer to other dimensions entirely. So the Dreamers are not simply creating bridges between space or telepathically connecting to other beings. They're able to tear down the entire walls between realities. It seems hardly out of the question, then, that they're uniquely capable of controlling the simulation to a significant degree, or even ripping the player out of it entirely. And if that's true, it makes absolute sense that the realms conjured by Dreamer and Clementine look as digital as they do. So there you go. There's my theory for the Remnant universe. Hopefully this will have made sense to you, and hopefully it seems like a reasonable conjecture. I won't drag this video out any longer than I already have. If you have feedback for me, please leave it in the comments. And if you want to see more from me, go ahead and subscribe. Now that Remnant 2 is on its way, I guess this channel won't be dying so soon.